Just so you know, in the past, Remembrance Day was the 4th of August, the day that the war started. It was moved to the 11th of November and called Armistice Day in 1919. And the 2-minute silence originates from South Africa, of all places, in 1918, when the Allies were in full retreat on the Western Front. The first minute to remember the dead, and the second minute to pray for victory. I'd like, over the next 20 minutes or whatever it is, to just look how our country dealt with the tragic loss of so many people. How Remembrance as we know it came into being, and the story of the unknown warrior. An order was issued in 1915 that no bodies would be repatriated from the war zone to UK, and this order stood until the 1960s. Previously, common soldiers tended to be buried in mass graves, and only senior officers repatriated. I'm going to start my talk with my great uncle, Stanley. And I'd like to read you, this is a contemporary newspaper cutting from the time. I can get it on the sorted. Let's see it. Mr. William Rawson, licensee of the Packhorse in Birtle on Tuesday, received information that his son, Private Stanley Rawson, of the King's Dragoon Guards had been killed in action in France on June the 2nd. The information came in a letter from the captain of his squadron, which was as follows. King's Dragoon Guards, Indian Expeditionary Force. Just to explain it, King's Dragoon Guards in 1914 were in India. They brought them back to France from India to fight in France. They came via Egypt and Marseille. Dear sir, I deeply regret having to announce to you the death of your son, Private Rawson of this regiment. He was killed in action in Flanders on June the 2nd while gallantly holding a trench under fire from German artillery. Please accept the sincere sympathy of the regiment in your bereavement, and especially the officers and men of A Squadron, to whom the loss is a personal one. Yours faithfully, H. Fleming, Captain. Now, since receiving the above letter, however, Mr. Rawson has received another letter from Captain Fleming as follows. It is with great pleasure I'm able to inform you that your son was not killed on June the 2nd, but only wounded, and is now in hospital. I have no details to present to how he is progressing, but no doubt he'll have written to you. I very much regret the error reported his death. Yours faithfully, etc. Next day, an hospital letter said Stanley's died in hospital. So, not particularly good way. So that's Stanley. That's his death penny. That was sent to his mum and dad 7 years after his death. And you can have a look at that afterwards. That is the actual death penny that was sent. It's like I said, 7 years after his death. So, we have the problem that sadly many families couldn't visit the graves of their loved ones. A society called the St Barnabas Society was formed to transport the poor who wished to go, but it was basic service. They would, however, place wreaths on graves for those who could not attend. Thomas Cook, in 1919, was doing holiday trips to the Western Front. And rich people used to go over there, and rich people could have their relatives disinterred, if that's the right word, and brought back to England. So, we see the figures there. British and Commonwealth Army suffered over 1 million casualties. 700,000 British died, of which 499,000 were not identified. That is a staggering number. I reckon that's 2/3 of those killed in the First World War were never identified. obviously there was temporary resting places. Many casualties were given, they say, temporary resting places. 326,000 bodies were never recovered. So we're talking around about 50% of all soldiers killed in the First World War, they never found the bodies. Staggering, isn't it?
So they was obviously blown up.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why you go around lots of the war graves and you see a soldier of the Great War known unto God.
And there's one point there that you say never,
yeah.
but they are still finding them.
Oh
to
yeah,
this
I was
day.
just going to say that
Sorry,
now.
yeah.
They are still finding people now.
And my regiment's burying people to this day.
Exactly.
With military honours.
Yeah, when they can recognise them, but it's still there. But in 1920, there was still 370,000 bodies not being found. This is David Railton. He was an army padre, and he vowed that he would. Well, he was constantly being asked where their loved ones were buried, and all they could do was give him a map reference. 173,000 unknown bodies had been buried. After the war, he became the vicar of St John the Baptist, Margate, and made a pledge that if God spares me, I'll spend half my life getting the rights for the men who fought here. And in 1920, his wife told him, it's now or never. Part of his vow was that he would bring the body of an unknown comrade, and I'll emphasise the word now, unknown comrade, to be brought home for a symbolic burial to represent the hundreds of thousands with no grave or buried without a name on a gravestone. The king wasn't keen on this, and he thought we British have stiff upper lips and we don't do things like that. But the Prime Minister at the time, who was Lloyd George, persuaded him that we should do it. And so it was agreed that in 1920 they would bring back a body to be buried. On the 7th of November 1920, 4 field ambulances were dispatched, each with 1 officer and 2 other ranks, to 4 different battlefields to recover a body of an unknown soldier. They were to be ones from the early battles of the war to ensure there was decomposition. These parties to ensure that there were British bodies. This could be done by examining scraps of uniform, buttons, etc. But there had to be no trace of identification. The 4 ambulances were given 4 different arrival times for their homeward journeys, so there could be no, comparing notes or possible collusion. The bodies were brought back in sacks to a makeshift chapel of rest. Reverend George Kendall re-examined the bodies to ensure there was no form of identification, then laid them out covered with a Union flag. A plain pine coffin was made available for the chosen body to rest in. At midnight, Brigadier Wyatt and Lieutenant Colonel Gell entered the chapel and chose 1 body at random to be returned as the unknown warrior. One account states that they were blindfolded to do the task. On the 8th of November, the chosen body was moved to Boulogne, while the other 3 were reinterred. That same day, Messrs Node and Sowerbutt's undertakers delivered a coffin which had been donated by the British Association of Undertakers to Boulogne. On it was an iron plate with the inscription, "A British warrior who fell in the Great War, 1914-18, for King and Country." The unopened pine coffin was placed inside that coffin. And then we start the journey home. The night that it was rested there, it was guarded by French troops. The following day, it was moved. You can see British pallbearers and the general staff are saluting as he comes out of Boulogne Castle there. It was escorted down to Boulogne Harbour on a French ambulance cart. Now, I know it's a French one, where you can see two French soldiers behind with a huge wreath, the pallbearers on the other side, and a French general saluting. And if you look, the man mounted on the horse pulling the cart is French, so it's a French hospital cart. 1,000 school children followed it, and a full division of French troops were the Guard of Honour. It was then placed on HMS Verdun. It thought it would be very apt, where the French had lost so many people that that HMS Verdun would be an apt way to bring him back to England. And it was going to use the same route as the hospital ships used to use from Boulogne to Dover. And here we see the coffins piked aboard. And now we have HMS Verdun, which was escorted by 6 other destroyers for its return journey. And it is an unknown soldier, because sailors were buried at sea and the Air Force hasn't been founded, whatever they call it, in 1914, and these bodies are from the 1914. It was piped, it brought to shore 19-gun salute, which was normally saved for a field marshal. Before we go on, I mentioned before, they wanted an unknown comrade, and this was voted against. And a few things that read on. It was very troubled times, 1919, 1920, in this country. The final peace treaty was not signed until June 1919, so that's when the First War officially ended, and the naval blockade of Germany continued up till then. And it's estimated that 250,000 Germans died of starvation in that time. British occupation troops were appalled by this and were known to share their rations with starving children. The Russian Revolution caused some consternation, and it was thought the name of the unknown comrade to be inappropriate. So he was called the warrior. There were also at that time demonstrations against our troops being sent to support the White Russians. There was industrial unrest in the country. It was not uncommon. The miners and the railway workers, for example, have been on strike during 1919, and as a result of us sending to help the White Russians. Many returning home, fit for heroes, were sadly disappointed. They reckon 35 million working days were lost. That seems a bit excessive, but that's what they reckon. This is a good one now for us military people. Military unrest caused by poor planning was on the go. Demob was felt to be dangerously rapid. Soldiers sent home with their weapons. Last out, or it was last in, first out. Policemen were demobbed before anybody else.
Absolutely
because
right
of
as
the
well.
unrest. Not only that, this is one for you, Ray. The Guards Division came home early to keep the peace in the country.
2-2.
No, it's not true. That was a
In
good-
Calais,
Bash some heads.
5,000 troops mutinied. It was only suppressed when they were surrounded by loyal troops with machine guns. The ringleaders were arrested, and Haig had to be persuaded not to have them shot. There were other protests in the country. Medals were pawned, and pawn tickets worn instead of medals on parade. Ex-military men who wanted their own memorial service in Luton were refused. They responded by burning down the town hall and wouldn't let the fire brigade through until it was gutted. When loyal troops arrived, they found them having a sing-song round a stolen piano. Luton remained under military occupation for several days. So this is all the background of what's going on when they're trying to do this for the unknown warrior. Where are we up to? Let's have a look. This is the carriage that brought the unknown warrior back up to London from Dover. You can just see the Union Jack through the door. They painted the carriage roof white so people can see it. And they reckon that the line and all the cuttings and the bridges all the way from Dover up to London were lined with people who came out to see it. And the train, I think it says on the notes, was also used to bring, what was a nurse called who got executed? They brought her back in the same thing. So here we are. It's leaving the station to go first to the Cenotaph and then to Westminster Abbey. The Cenotaph. Cenotaph means empty grave. There was a suggestion the unknown warrior should be buried beneath it, but that was quickly rejected. The original cenotaph was meant to be a temporary structure and was built like a stage set, so it became so unstable it had to be demolished. The outcry was so great that it was decided in 1919 to build a permanent one. By the last week of 1919, 500,000 people have visited it. The famous architect Hutchinson designed this one in 2 weeks, and in January 1920 the old one was demolished and building commenced on the present one. Not everyone really approved of it. You've heard of Siegfried Sassoon? Siegfried Sassoon wrote, "The Prince of Darkness to the cenotaph bowed as he walked away, and I heard him laugh." The Church Times wrote denouncing the public sentiment as a cult and cenotaph idolatry. There's a cenotaph just after it was unveiled. The council had to come every week, so 100,000 wreaths were laid, and the council had to come every week to clear the wreaths away, because they were blocking the road basically. So here's the unknown warrior. You can see the Union flag draped over his coffin. The flag had been used by Padre Railton throughout the war and was stained with the mud and blood of the trenches. A newspaper cutting of the Times says, "At the cenotaph that day was a vast multitude of people, including Private Thomas Pesteris of the Scottish Rifles, so badly wounded that he was invalided out of the service. He was the youngest of 9 brothers who joined the army. He lost 8 brothers in the war." A one-legged man with shrapnel-scarred face stood next to his mother, the only one of her 6 sons to survive the war. Thousands of football supporters from Blackburn, Blackpool and Sheffield were in London to see their teams play that afternoon and spent the morning queuing to pay their respects. By November the 15th, over 1.5 million had visited the cenotaph and 100,000 wreaths laid. Add to that, 500,000 visited the tomb of the unknown warrior. So here we are, we're entering Westminster Abbey. 8,000 places were made available in the Abbey or the cenotaph for the grieving. It was decided that the fashionable society be excluded in favour of the selected widows and mothers of those who had fallen, especially like us in the humbler ranks. Special consideration was given to those women who'd lost their husbands and all their sons. A little band of approximately 100 was seated at the front of the congregation. Next came those who'd lost their sons or their only son, and then came the women who'd lost their husband only. There were also 100 nurses who had been wounded or blinded, were included, as well as a little girl who wrote, she had 9 brothers killed or missing, and a 12-year-old boy who wrote, the man in the coffin might be my daddy. And you see there, 72, I think it says, was it 74, Victoria Cross holders were the guard of honour for the king going in. And there is a coffin awaiting interment inside the cathedral, a painting done at the time of the interment of the coffin or the body. Here, there was again a newspaper report. There was a simple but very moving interment described at the time as the most beautiful, the most touching and the most impressive that in all its long eventful story this island has ever seen. The king, on behalf of the nation, scattered earth from the battlefields from a silver shell. The hymn Abide With Me was sung. Since then, and it's still happening, at the FA Cup final, Abide With Me is sung before the kick-off.
And you still lose.
Yeah, they still do, yeah. Now, let's just go on. There's the people who are visiting the grave of the unknown warrior afterwards. And there's the grave as it is. This didn't go on until 1921 or 22. All the brass work you can see is from cartridge cases. And I'll read it for you. Beneath this stone rests the body of a British warrior, unknown by name or rank, brought from France to lie among the most illustrious of the land, and buried here on Armistice Day, November 1920, in the presence of His Majesty King George V, his ministers of state, the chiefs of his forces, and a vast concourse of the nation. Thus are commemorated the many multitudes who during the Great War of 1914-18 give the most that man can give, life itself, for God, for king and country, for loved ones, home and empire, for the sacred cause of justice and the freedom of the world. And underneath it, they buried him among the kings because he had done good towards God and towards his house. I did have another piece of paper, so I worked, which I seem to have lost, but never mind. There are 4 inscriptions. You can't see them probably because they're covered by poppies. On the top it said, the Lord knoweth them that are his. That's from 2 Timothy 2:19. Down one side it goes, unknown yet well known, dying, and behold we live. That's 2 Corinthians 6:9. Greater love has no man than this. On the other side, John 15:13. And in Christ all shall be made alive, across the bottom. The last one was a bit contentious to a lot of people, because obviously lots of non-Christians fought and died in the war. But the powers that be said, you're doing all this in a Christian church, we're going to put Christian sayings around it. Simple as that. That's looking up the aisle towards the high altar where you see it. This is before they became Prince and Princess of Wales, her wedding. Interesting enough, the Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, old Queen Mother, her brother was never found. He was killed in the First War, never found. And she put her wedding bouquet on the grave of the unknown warrior, and so did Diana, not Diana.
Kate.
Kate. So did she. So
And did the Queen.
Yes, so did the Queen. Yes, the old any royal wedding is there. They always leave their wedding bouquet on the unknown warrior. And here Barack Obama, when he came, put in his wreath at the unknown warrior. The Americans gave the unknown warrior the Congressional Medal of Honor, and it's supposed to be one of them pillars somewhere. The British gave the Americans for their unknown warrior the military medal.
No, they didn't. They gave him the Victoria Cross.
No, they gave them the military medal.
They gave him the Victoria Cross, and it's displayed at Arlington.
Well, it's changed from the book I've read.
No, it's the only Victoria Cross that wasn't awarded.
All right.
to some
So there, you
Victoria
are. That's the present Queen anyway.
Yeah.
Anyway. And of course, no one knows, will ever know who the warrior is. Too many thousands grieving, it gave hope.
How did they pick him out at 4? Is it just a random?
Yeah.
They went to, I said right, they went to 4 different battlefields,
Yeah.
dug a body up that we could not be identified,
Yeah.
shoved him in a room, and then late at night, somebody went in blindfolded and said that one. I just got a bit long now, well, hopefully not boring you. Sadly, it still goes on. Bryce Norton will all have seen this on the telly, as servicemen and women all die too often, don't they?
Mm.
Royal Wooten Basset, as it is known now, isn't it? Have you done the trip here?
Yes.
Well, there's a couple of pictures, you see. For those who haven't been, that's the main memorial in the centre. This is alright, the collecting the body that's just died, that's on one wall, and you take to the other wall. The fella on the right is carving the dead man's name into the wall. The other two in the middle are preparing him for burial. The one on the left is opening a door, and it's supposed to be the door to eternity, I believe.
How can they carve his name if they don't know who he is?
Oh, this is, they know this one. We're going to get there in a minute. You can see the names on that wall. There's 16,000 names
Yeah.
around the walls.
They're only since the Second World
Since
War.
1945, 16,000. And each year they carve that year's, the previous year's
Yeah.
names on it. And you can see it just goes on and on. I've been a couple of times with Ron, and I go and I look, and we both look. Good pal of mine, Mick Herbert's on there, Joe Cotton, Mr. Williams with Miss Weatherall Pepper, Joe Wider. Who's the Armstrong
where's that
fella?
at?
I can't
What?
know. What's
Ian Armstrong.
Ian Armstrong. They're all fellas we know
Yeah.
whose names are on that wall.
Where is it now? Is that the Birmingham one?
It's near Birmingham.
Near
yeah.
Birmingham,
Yeah.
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 And I'll be quite honest with you, when I found Mick Herbert and Joe Cotton's name on the wall, I had a lump in my throat.
Yeah.
Very moving. And as you see, you know, I mean, people come, it's all very sad. I've put these on just for a reference. There's lots of the memorials. This is interesting because on the left, as you look at it, is a lumberjill, and on the right is a land army girl. If you look, well, you won't be able to read the plinth on it. They've got it the wrong way around on the plinth underneath. So, this is a very moving one. All the shot at dawn people who were given a pardon, there's a posting for every one of them, and the name is on the post.
Last time we went, me, Mark.
And so there we are, a fitting memorial for all those who died serving their countries. Going back to Stanley, we mentioned him right at the beginning. That's Stanley's grave in Boulogne. None of this fancy standing up jobs. These are all laying down type
Yeah.
gravestones. But that's him. That's my brother who sadly passed away earlier this year. But we went over for the 100th anniversary of Stanley's death to put a wreath on his grave to show he wasn't forgotten. And strange enough, in that graveyard, it's by the main cemetery in Boulogne. If you go over on your battlefield tour, you might want to visit there. But there's a Portuguese First World War cemetery in there, from the Portuguese army. I never knew the Portuguese fought in the First World War.
Portuguese, Brazilians,
Yeah,
all sorts
but they
of
clearly
things.
did, and they've got a cemetery.
How do you
there.
find the grave you're looking for? There must be bloody
There's
thousands
a
of-
book with all the grave
Oh, is it?
in.
Yeah.
So, going down the sun in the morning, we'll remember them. Do you want to switch the light on?
Just behind you there.
Going back to the shot at dawn there, you said